Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this brief video, I will be looking at the week starting on Monday, January the 5th, 2026. First part of the video will be a preview of the main astrological events taking place over the course of a week, and the second part will be an I Ching reading for the week. And this reading will have 4 sections. First, there'll be a general overview, then money, then career, and finally relationships. So let's start off with the astrology. So here is the chart for the very beginning of the week, midnight on Monday, January the 6th, midnight January the 5th, 2026. So here is the chart, and don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as this chart is concerned, you can see that we've got 4 planets in Capricorn. So we're going to have 4 planets in Capricorn throughout the week. 4 personal planets, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars. So there is a big Capricorn emphasis here, and it's more than that. We have a conjunction forming, a conjunction between Venus, the Sun, and Mars. And this conjunction, well, it's been around for a few days, but it becomes exact over the course of a week. So on Tuesday, that's Tuesday, January the 6th, we have Sun conjunct Venus. So Sun is exactly conjunct Venus in Capricorn. So the question is this a good thing? I mean, that is an important question. There is a view that when you have an exact conjunction, it is cazimi, and somehow Venus is strengthened by being so close to the Sun. I would take issue with that. I mean, in my experience, the closer Venus comes to the Sun, the more it gets burnt up. And, that's the nature of combustion. And so when we think about Sun conjunct Venus, it just might be that the Venus principle gets overwhelmed. And, that's something I will be talking about, in some detail, in a couple of days' time. But, what does it mean? Well, Sun conjunct Venus may say something about relationships, may be about one person overwhelming the other person. Of course, Venus is a natural ruler of women, and so maybe you get an image there of an overwhelming man, a man not listening to a woman. I mean, that is, one view of Sun conjunct Venus, or not taking her seriously. So, I'm not saying that's the only way in which Sun conjunct Venus can work, but it's certainly a possibility. Then a couple of days later, we have Venus conjunct Mars. So this Venus conjunct Mars has been around for a long time. And with Venus conjunct Mars, that's on Thursday the 8th. So that is an aspect that's very much about attraction. I've been talking about it quite a lot. It's about desire. It's certainly got a sexual element to it, this Venus conjunct Mars. And it can be about people being attractive. But there are 2 sides to it, because when you look at Venus conjunct Mars, well, you could say, well, Venus is a fortunate planet, it's making Mars stronger, but does it work both ways? No, well, not really, because Mars is a malefic, and so Mars might be undermining Venus. So you put that together with Sun conjunct Venus on Tuesday, on the 6th, and you've got Venus conjunct Mars on the Thursday. Poor Venus may be not feeling very happy about that. These sort of male planets, Sun and Mars, right next to Venus. Yeah, Venus might feel that it's difficult to express herself. I mean, I say herself because Venus is a feminine planet. Though on a positive note, Venus conjunct Mars is about attraction. It's about being seductive. It's about charisma, and it's perhaps about having an audience. Some people find us attractive, some people don't, and we perhaps have to choose the right audience with Venus conjunct Mars. Then on Friday, we've got Sun conjunct Mars. So see, these conjunctions are really happening thick and fast. First Sun conjunct Venus, then Venus conjunct Mars, now Sun conjunct Mars. So Sun conjunct Mars, these are two masculine planets. They're quite fiery planets. I mean, I know that Capricorn is not a particularly fiery sign, but when you put them together, even if they are in Capricorn, then I think that could be quite explosive. And some people are very keen to get attention. They demand attention. They want to be taken seriously. And it can be quite an angry combination, Sun conjunct Mars. And at the same time, we've got Venus opposition Jupiter on the same day. That's Friday the 9th, Venus opposition Jupiter. Well, Venus opposition Jupiter, it might be too much of a good thing. I mean, Venus and Jupiter are, of course, the benefics. They're quite lucky planets. And so you might think if they're in aspect with one another, that's loads of luck. But, Venus opposition Jupiter can be rather gushing. And it might be extravagant. I'm not saying it will be extravagant, perhaps because you have to look at the signs. I mean, it is Venus in Capricorn opposition Jupiter in Cancer. So maybe it's not being financially extravagant, but maybe it's being sort of emotionally extravagant. But, it's perhaps a somewhat complicated aspect. But, when I do my horoscopes for Friday the 9th, I'll be looking at this Venus opposition Jupiter aspect in detail. Then on Saturday, we've got more aspects. We've got Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus, Sun opposition Jupiter, Mars opposition Jupiter, and we've got the last quarter moon, because we started the week with a full moon, and we're ending it with that last quarter moon. And I don't really want to go into detail about these aspects, but that Sun opposition Jupiter may be relevant, because heliocentrically, a Sun opposition Jupiter is Earth conjunct Jupiter, and Earth conjunct Jupiter can be the final cog. It can be the thing that blows everything up. I mean, I know that Sun opposition Jupiter, it happens every year, but it can be quite violent. I mean, you have to look at what else is going on around it. And I mean, I haven't perhaps gone into as much detail as I should have done, but certainly next week I'll be looking at this Sun opposition Jupiter in closer detail, because I do think that it does matter. And yeah, the weekend does see a last quarter moon. So, we had a new moon, December the 22nd, 21st, something like that. Was that when it was? We had a new moon late Sagittarius last year, not just last month. And last quarter, well, it's our final chance. We've got to get it together. That may be how we feel at the end of a week, because if we don't get it together, then, when are we going to get it together? So looking at the week overall, there's a lot happening. And it's to do fundamentally, primarily, with that conjunction between Sun, Venus, and Mars. And, this conjunction, is also pretty close to the opposition with Jupiter. So it is quite powerful, and it's potentially quite violent. And I can see that already things are going on in the world. I mean, I'm making this video on Friday, Saturday night, Sunday morning, and you can see already that we've just had that fire in Switzerland, and now there's news about explosions in Venezuela. And don't forget we've got a full moon. There's a full moon on when I'm making this recording, and that full moon is right on Venezuela's sun. At least the independence chart of Venezuela set for 1811. It's which was, I think it came into being on July the 5th, 1811. So it had its sun that's 1314 Cancer. So we had just had that full moon on that position. And so there are a lot of places to watch. And of course, there's Iran. I'm not quite sure what's going on with Iran, but there have been street protests, and this has perhaps been caused by inflation. And of course, America wants to get involved. Doesn't America always want to get involved? So it could be quite a tumultuous week. So that's the astrology. And now I want to turn my attention to the I Ching. So remember, with this I Ching, it's just entirely voluntary. If you do not want if you don't want your I Ching read, you don't have to have it read. It only applies to people who are watching the I Ching section of this video. So yeah, if you don't want me to talk about your I Ching, or try to talk about your week from an I Ching perspective, you don't have to listen. You can just stop the video right now. Anyway, so this I Ching reading is going to have 4 sections. First, I'm going to look at things in a general sense. Then I'm going to look at it from a financial perspective, then career and business, and finally relationships. So I asked the question, what is the week going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 61. Now, 61 is a hexagram that seems to come up quite a lot when I do my I Ching readings. I mean, maybe that's just my imagination. You'd think statistically it would just come up as much or as little as any other hexagram. But 61 is about inner truth. It's about the search for the truth and the possibility that we can find the truth. And because if you look at this hexagram, it's fundamentally balanced. It has symmetry. You've got 2 unbroken lines at the top, you've got 2 unbroken lines at the bottom, and then you've got those 2 broken lines in the middle, nicely balanced, with a space in the middle. And I think that space is important. That means that there is room for the truth, room for truth, in our own hearts, but also perhaps in other people's hearts as well. And we are accepting that we don't have all the answers, but at the same time, we know we can speak not just with conviction, but with truth. We're not going to make things up, and we're going to be quite good at transmitting the truth. The Wilhelm translation of the I Ching, when it talks about the inner truth, it says, even pigs and fishes understand, because according to Wilhelm, the pigs and fishes in ancient China are known to be maybe sort of quite willful, very difficult to get pigs and fishes to understand, but they can understand. And so this is quite a healthy process. And we have 2 moving lines. The second line from the bottom moves, and the third line moves as well. So the second line is about having a certain pull. That, if we speak the truth and we are honest, we can get attention. It's more than attention. I think people can be attracted to us. And the imagery we get with the second line from the bottom is a crane as in a bird. And the bird, this is a mother crane, and she's in the shade. And she's calling out, but in quite a sort of a low-profile way. She's not making a big performance of it. And her offspring, these small cranes, they just hear her, and they just are attracted to her protectiveness. that's her in the shade. She's not making a big performance of it. She just provides quiet protection. And I'm not quite sure who we are, who we should emulate. Are we the small cranes looking for nourishment, or perhaps we are the big crane who's got something to offer, but is not making a big performance about it. And what is being offered? Well, it's the truth. The truth is something that is fundamentally attractive. If someone is speaking the truth, then can that really be ignored? And there is this silent pull to the truth that we just can't avoid. And that's certainly the way it should be. But we move to the third line. The third line moves. And that could be a problem, the third line. It very often is a problem in I Ching. Third line tends to be unfortunate. And with the third line, there seems to be a danger here that, we are looking for attachment. We're looking for a connection. And, we want to be with people. We want to be taken seriously. But in the process, we might lose some of our agency. In other words, we might, for example, be dependent on what another person says, what another person does. And that obviously is not a good position to be. We are almost imprisoned by the situation. And, when our well-being is dependent on another person's whim, it can be a problem. And certainly this is not a good place to find the truth. We want to find the truth, and we also want to be recognized, and we want to be supported, but how much are we prepared to give away? And we also have to think about our happiness and our basic centeredness. And this might go beyond the concept of truth, because if you look at this hexagram, which is a very centered hexagram, what we don't want is that centeredness to be dependent on someone else, which is kind of ridiculous. We have big ambitions. We might have spiritual ambitions, but it can't happen unless some external agency helps us or is there for us, which is, of course, not the way it should be. It's not the way it can be. I mean, if we have something that is really precious and we want to look after it, I mean, it's not just precious, but something which is eternal in its preciousness. We can't be dependent on another person's whim. We need to be self-reliant here, and perhaps that is the message of this line. Now, two lines moving. That means we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 37, which is the family. And I think under the circumstances, this is quite a good hexagram to move to. Particularly when we think about the previous hexagram, and when we think about the crane just calling out in a very sort of low-profile way, in an almost silent way. But those that hear her, they respond, and the family might represent the shade. I mean, the shade in a positive way. It represents, where we are comfortable, where we feel at home. And perhaps that's what we're looking for when we think about the inner truth. The inner truth is where things are obvious, what we should be looking for. And when we're talking about the family, it might be literally the family. It might be just our group. People we don't just get on with, we belong with them. So it needn't be family, it could be a circle of friends, it could be an organization, it could be whatever it is. Just something that you just need to be part of or want to be part of. And that might actually be the truth. And, we get a lot of things coming our way, a lot of signals coming our way, but we can hear a certain call. We can hear the call of something that wants us to get closer to it, to be part of it. And so, maybe that's how we should be thinking about this week. It's not necessarily about struggling, doing things on our own, feeling we're dependent on something outside us. No, we don't want to be dependent on anything, but we want to be part of something. And I think that this I Ching is perhaps suggesting that that is the solution. So turning to money. So if we're thinking about money, then with this hexagram 61 inner truth, well, it might be the case that we start to tune into what the truth of the matter really is as far as money is concerned. A lot of people have got a lot of stuff to say. They've got a lot of stuff to sell, maybe. And, it might sometimes be difficult to work out what's going on. But it's interesting with this hexagram, inner truth representing the whole week, that it comes just after a full moon. So, the beginning of a week, a lot of us were still getting over that full moon. So we had a full moon, 13 degrees 2 minutes Cancer on the weekend of the 3rd and the 4th. And so when you're dealing with a full moon, you're feeling full moon. Well, full moons can be about the truth. We see the truth for what it is. We understand. Everything becomes clear. Of course, just because we see the truth, just because we understand, doesn't necessarily mean that anything is going to happen. But the truth certainly is available to us as far as money is concerned. So perhaps that's up to us. We can look at our bank account. We can look at what's going in. We can look at what we're spending. We might see the truth of the matter. We might see the truth that we're spending too much, or we're not earning enough, or that perhaps we're being too generous. It's all becoming clear. And ideally, we need to be responsible for our own money, and we need to have agency. And I think that's part of what's going on. And of course, when you're dealing with money, there are still feelings of security, and the second line moves here, and that's the crane talking and announcing this bird, the crane in the shade. Talking, and it's making a lot of sense. And so at some level we just understand what we should be doing financially. We know what we can get away with. We know what we're earning, perhaps. We know what we've got saved. If we've got no money, well, we still are aware of this situation. Money creates possibilities, and of course it does the opposite. Lack of money can create a realization that there are limited horizons. But whatever it is, we see the truth. And then the third line moves. Now this is quite important, because it does talk about happiness being external. And of course, when you're talking about money, people come up with all sorts of ideas about money and happiness. Money can't buy you happiness. Who says that? Maybe it's people who have loads of money. They say, well, I've got loads of money. It didn't make me happy. Money can't buy you happiness. Well, yeah, but all things being equal, you're likely to be happier if you've got money rather than if you haven't got the money. And not having money can certainly make you miserable, and it can certainly have an impact on your mental health. There's no doubt about that. But still, one does not want to be in a situation where one's happiness is overly influenced by money. And that is perhaps one of the problems of the third line moving. The third line is saying that our happiness is to an extent externalized. Ideally that happiness should be our happiness. We should have responsibility over that happiness, not something else. But there is a danger there. And so it's possible that from a financial perspective, we rely on things which are external to us. Perhaps we feel that financially we are out of control, that we're completely reliant on another person's whim, what another person gives, what another person takes away. And somehow we have got to kind of break free from that. And I think that is really important. We have to, as far as is possible, take control of the situation. Because if we're financially reliant on another person, or our finances are reliant on another person's decision, well, it's just going to make us miserable. And then, two moving lines, we do move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 37, which is the family. And so, the family, it might be saying that perhaps we don't have to make all the decisions financially. Maybe there's some idea about joint finance, or it just could be that a lot of things going on with money are related to the family. It's perhaps family's demands, what members of your family need. You just have to, you're tempted to you give them your money. It may feel as if there's no choice. And so that's looking at it perhaps in a negative way, but there is a positive way. And the family could say, well, if you're dealing with the family, then maybe that's where the money is. That perhaps members of a family, they have their money, they pool their money, they look after each other, and maybe that could well be how it feels financially. So it's not entirely clear how that's working. I mean, the family, I would not have said was a hexagram that you could particularly associate with money, but it just might be that perhaps some of your answers, the answers you're looking for financially, are related to your family, and perhaps your home as well. And what are you spending your money on? Maybe you're spending your money on something that is unnecessary, or perhaps you're being overgenerous to a member of your family. I mean, that is certainly a possibility. And the family is not just about blood relatives. A family can be about the group you are involved with, and what financial demands that group might present you with. And then there is career and business. So, we just had a full moon. We had a full moon on the 3rd and the 4th of January, that weekend. I think it was the 3rd we had the full moon. So the full moon can be about the truth. Something is being manifested. And so when we see the truth, well, what do we do? And so as far as your work is concerned, if you happen to have a job, or if you are working, maybe you're not, maybe you're retired, I mean, I don't know. But if you are working, then something is starting to become clearer. And perhaps it's something that started since the full moon. And it's becoming clearer to you. And at the same time, because you are feeling clear about something, that might say something about the way you can communicate. You can give people clarity, and you can say things which people actually listen to. And remember with what I said about the Wilhelm translation of I Ching. Even the pigs and fishes understand. So if you're at work and you're trying to get someone to understand something, finally you may be able to get through to them. You are making sense. And if you are making sense, then it really is a time to be pushing your point. On the other hand, the 3rd line moves, and there may be times over the week when your career progress seems to be somewhat dependent on other people. That's not really the way it should be. That you're trying to get things done. You do your best, but still you're having to worry about what other people are going to do, whether or not they're going to cooperate, whether or not they're going to give you permission. If you are looking for a job or a promotion or whatever, again, a classic thing, you are dependent on someone else's decision. And, as far as is possible, you should try to get away from that. You should not be putting yourself in a position where your career success, or at least your perceived career success, is dependent on someone else. And, there is a danger that, if you feel this dependency, you just might feel rather trapped. And that's obviously not a good place to be. And then this hexagram moves because of those two moving lines, and it moves to hexagram number 37. So if we're talking about hexagram number 37, as far as your work is concerned, you perhaps ask yourself who your friends are. 37 is the family. Who are your allies? Who can help you? What are you a part of? And so if you are working with other people, then try to see yourself as being part of a group. And it's not necessarily just about you benefiting, you gaining, you making progress. It's about everyone making progress, and perhaps having a collective view. Even if you run your own business, you can still have a collective view. It's not just your happiness or your success that matters. It's everyone's success that matters. And your clan, your family, your group, they are the ones that can benefit, and you can benefit together. And finally, there is relationships. And the position with relationships, well, it does go back to that full moon. I talked about that full moon a couple of days ago, and full moons can be about relationships. If you think about it, you've got the sun and the moon are opposition one another. The sun often related to the masculine, the moon related to the feminine. So you've got the sun and the moon coming in opposition to one another. And so you can see the conflict. You can see how you and another person do not necessarily get on 100%. It's not like you're necessarily enemies, but there are differences. And so perhaps this hexagram inner truth is telling you about those differences. But with this hexagram, we have to kind of focus on the positives and kind of steer clear of the negatives. And the positives with this hexagram, the inner truth, is the second line. The second line, without doubt, talks about attraction, because it's talking about just hearing almost the silent voice of someone. You just feel the pull of how someone is communicating. It's a sound that just feels familiar, and it feels nurturing. Who is giving off this sound? Of course, the symbol of this second line moving is the crane. The crane as a bird calling its young, and its young just responding very immediately because they know that there's something that their mother is protective. And perhaps it's the same with relationships. You have the capacity to protect, and those that belong to you will just be naturally attracted to you, and it can work work in the other way. Sometimes you might need protecting, and maybe the right person, the person who can protect, is available and is calling for you. That certainly could happen. But then the third line moves, and the third line creates a complication, and the complication would be, it would be particularly strong if you were at the beginning of a relationship, or you were frantic to maintain a relationship or to start a relationship, because the problem about the third line is because it talks about dependency. It talks about being dependent on another person. If someone is nice to you, you feel happy. If they reject you, you feel miserable. So what does that mean? It means your happiness and your well-being are dependent on another person. And that is absolutely not desirable. That is going to make you feel miserable. And so you have to ask yourself, how much freedom do you have? In any relationship, you want to be free, and you don't want to be a prisoner to that relationship. And the question is, what are you a prisoner to? Is it because someone else is asserting control over you, or are you a prisoner perhaps to the fantasy of a relationship? And relationships can work on a fantasy level. And if you can't let go of the fantasy, then yeah, you are a prisoner to that fantasy. And so you want to be happy in general because of yourself. It needs to be ideally a self-generated happiness. You don't want a situation where your peace of mind and harmony is totally dependent on what another person is doing. I mean, that's not a good place to be. And it doesn't matter what the relationship is. If you're dependent on another person, if your well-being is dependent on another person, well, that's not healthy. And so it's this I Ching is really asking you to be as contained as possible. Yeah, particularly when it comes to things like happiness and contentment. And then we have a moving line, and with two moving lines. I've told you we've got second line moves and the third line moves. So we move to a second hexagram, and that hexagram is hexagram number 37, which is the family. And the family is quite a promising hexagram, and it might be talking about a relationship which develops. I mean, you could argue that a family is the development of relationship. I mean, you could say, literally, people have a relationship, they formalize that relationship, and in the end, they become a family unit. And whatever the relationship is, you need some structure, you need some permanence, you need to become part of something. And that's perhaps what you're really looking for here, being part of something. And it's not necessarily about a relationship, a fixed, long-lasting relationship. It can be any form of relationship, but just feeling that people are just there all the time, and that's what you're looking for. And perhaps that's almost what you expect, but I think at the end of a week, you can start to see how that can happen, and that's perhaps what you should be striving for, to be part of something, to be part of a family, to be part of a clan, to be part of a group. And in that way, you can feel quite sort of happy and content. And that's it. So thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoy the week. You don't get too overwhelmed by the conjunctions between Sun, Venus, and Mars. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would of course be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.